Okay, so we're going to enter into possibly one of the most valuable components of this weekend. I'm going to show you an example of conversational profiling. Now, conversational profiling is very different than the other active profiling that we originally taught in profiler training. And the reason why we taught the earlier version, the standard question and answer, is because that is the place you must begin. You must begin by asking distinctive questions. A or B, forced choice, is really the only place to start. But eventually, you'll want to go into conversational profiling, which is far more authentic for you as a profiler. And it is effectively a conversation you start and guide with the other person to cull as much information from them as humanly possible. So conversational profiling, think of this as the magnet in the middle of the field. This is where you ultimately want to be with your profiling sessions. And I found that conversational profiling is probably the most accurate, or it's the strategy I've used to get the most accurate results, even people who are super tough to profile. Because you're not getting them to tell you what's going on in their mind, because that's languageless. Cognitive functions are something that we just use naturally. We don't have specific words for them. We're like a fish in water. They're our entire experience. We have no way of telling somebody the thought processes we're using to get the strategies that emerge. But we can get clues about what's going on in another person's mind. And conversational profiling is a guided conversation that helps reveal those. So what's going to happen in this is I'm going to behave with Trevor like I do with every person I profile. So you're going to watch me go through a very authentic profiling session. But I will be stopping it every once in a while or pausing if I see something that's of note, or if I do something that might be, I don't know, like very odd or weird or too much out of your frame of reference. I will pause it for those moments. But for the most part, we're just going to go through an entire session. All right, so hold your questions to the end, tag them, write them down if you've got them. They're going to be very important. But this is how I profile everybody. All right? All right, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so one of the first things, and I'm still going to be setting up, one of the first things I do is I make sure that I am as comfortable as possible. So I'm going to get into a very comfortable position for me. And it's hard to do it when you're doing it virtually to get in a super comfortable position unless you just let yourself. So sometimes I do it in my pajamas, and sometimes I do it in bed. And sometimes, I mean, I won't necessarily tell the person that I'm in bed, but I'll just stay in my pajamas and be in bed. But the important thing is that you're in as comfortable a position as humanly possible. And then you want to encourage the other person as well. And I'll show you rapport building in the beginning. I'll show you the conversational profiling technique, and then I'll show a little bit of the wrap-up, a little bit of how I explain it to the other person. But for the most part, we're just going to go through the profiling bit. Okay. All right. So, Trevor.
Yes.
Yes. All right. You're probably not very comfortable right now. No. My guess is that you're massively outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Because you're going to be profiled in front of a whole bunch of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, give me a story from your childhood, if you can think of one, that was kind of ridiculous to you. Yeah, kind of ridiculous, or all the way up to truly insane. Do you have any stories from your childhood that are just sort of ridiculous all the way up to totally insane?
I mean, when I was 6, I was at my daycare, and one of the other kids there was about 15, 20 yards away from me, and he had a mop handle, and he threw it at me, hit me dead center in the forehead, and I had to get stitches. I mean, that was pretty ridiculously crazy for me.
Did it actually like stick in your forehead? Or
no, it just hit me and bounced off.
All right. So that was ridiculous because the kid just hit you dead on.
Just dead on.
Just
I had to get stitches.
Perfect accuracy.
Yeah.
All right. What was the most awkward date you've ever been on?
A few. I mean, the most awkward ones are just where the other person doesn't want to talk, or gives one-word answers. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are kind of what happened on all the awkward ones. Because
you probably enjoy it when another person carries a conversation a bit. Or you actually are pretty good at carrying conversations yourself, actually.
Yeah, but I hate doing it.
Doing it.
every sentence. There's got to be some kickback, you know.
Yeah, of course, of course. All right. So what's your middle name?
Alden.
Eldon. That's an unusual middle name. Where does
Yeah.
that come from?
My grandpa.
So you're named after your grandfather.
Just my middle name.
Just the middle name. All right. Do you reveal that to people very often?
No.
All right. Is this something that you don't usually talk about?
Well, because I'd like people to guess it. Nobody ever guesses it. And
Nobody ever does.
I never tell them.
Yeah. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a bunch of what I call side door questions.
Okay.
Which means that I'm going to try to get into the mental, like how your mind works, but you can't tell me that because it's just operating on an unconscious level for you. So I have to get there using what I call side door questions, meaning that I'm going to try to find an entrance into your mind without having to ask you direct questions. So basically, everything you say is the right answer, as long as it's authentic for you.
Okay.
And if you're confused by anything that I'm asking, just go ahead and say that, because sometimes type is written into the confusion. All right. So sometimes what you're confused by is just as revealing to me as your answer. So please feel free to be just 100% authentic. And if you offer an answer that, like reflects what friends think, go ahead and answer that. But just let me know that that's like, well, my friends say I'm blah, 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 but I would say I'm more like this. Or my friends say I'm blah, 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 blah. Do you agree with that? Yeah, I would say that's a pretty fair assessment. So if it's somebody else's impression of you, just go ahead and let me know that. But that's still the right answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Any questions before we begin?
No. Go ahead.
So the first question I'm going to ask you is the same question I ask everybody. And that is, what is it that you love to do? And when I say what do you love to do, I mean, what do you love to do so much, the only reason you stop is because you're exhausted. Otherwise, you go on indefinitely.
Working on my motorcycle, riding my motorcycle. I mean, you only stop because you absolutely have to. Mm-hmm. You're tired, you can't ride anymore, or you can't work on it any longer. Playing the guitar, fingers start to hurt after a while.
Mm-hmm. What do you find more rewarding, working on your motorcycle or riding it?
More rewarding?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say riding it.
What does riding a motorcycle do for you that other things can't?
It's just a sense of freedom. Like you're just going somewhere, you're traveling.
Is it visceral for you? Like the wind in your hair, like the bugs on your helmet, like the whole experience? Or is it mostly just knowing you can hop on a motorcycle and just go anywhere?
I'd say it's probably more visceral.
And what is it about working on your motorcycle that you love so much?
It's usually just time to think, and I'm usually alone, playing music, just kind of tinkering, fiddling around with things.
So when you're working on a motorcycle, I would imagine you're doing a lot of problem solving. So what kinds of things are you thinking? Like if it gives you time to think, you mean think on the challenge at hand or think on other things?
Think on the challenge at hand, and once I'm done with that problem, while I'm working on it, okay, this is the problem, here's how to fix it, okay, I'm fixing it, and, time to think and reflect on things that are going on.
When you say things that are going on, you mean like ancillary things in your life? Like stuff that isn't the motorcycle?
Yeah, things like that. Just a lot of just stuff that's going on in my life, what I want to do, other stuff, politics, news, kind of think on that. Because it's hard for me to think while I'm not doing anything, like sit and think.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to be doing something so I can think.
Mm-hmm. What happens if you just try to sit and think?
I don't know. For me, it's like trying to go somewhere in a car while the engine's turned off. It's just, you hit the gas pedal and there's nothing. I sit and think and I'm just, so I don't know. It's almost like my body needs to be doing something so my brain can kick in.
Like specifically your hands, or do you think that like if music is going on in the background, can you think better?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's one thing.
But if your hands aren't busy and music is on, can you think well, or do you have to have your hands busy?
I don't have to. I don't know. I think it's because I like to be able to kind of distract myself if need be. Because one thing I've learned is, when you have a problem, sometimes it's better to leave it and come back to it.
So, going back to the challenge at hand, and then it gives you time to think and reflect. Is it one of those things where you focus on the problem to solve? Once you have it solved, then it's a matter of just making it happen, and then you toggle from the mechanical problem in front of you to then, while you're just implementing the solution, like bigger concepts. You said you think about politics, news, things that are going on in your life.
Yeah.
So is it like a toggle from the challenge to then life situation, then back to challenge, then back to life situation?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like one thing's running in the background, and then I switch which one I'm focusing on, and it's not like I had to like force myself to do it. It's just quick and easy, it's simple.
Yeah. Let's go back to you talking about playing guitar. You said that you could do that until your hands get tired, basically.
Yeah.
What kind of music do you like to play?
Like a lot of rock and blues type stuff.
What is it about rock and blues that really speaks to you?
I don't know. I find the guitar like kind of gives me an emotional like response. Like when you hear a good song, it kind of like strikes a chord inside you.
Do you write your own music, or do you generally just play other people's music?
I generally just play other people's.
Who's some of your favorite?
I mean the Beatles. One, Jack White, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, all those. Johnny Cash, Elvis.
Old Beatles or new Beatles? I mean, like more recent Beatles.
Oh, like late 60s? Early.
So the stuff that's more chipper, actually.
Yeah.
Do you find that you play that kind of music because it helps you become chipper? Or is it more that it's challenging, so you like to master it, or?
I honestly don't know. I don't know if I don't really think it makes me more chipper.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe it does. I'm not sure.
Do you not really think about it? You just go with the music that speaks to you, and
I just go with what I think
Yeah.
sounds good. I mean, I guess it probably does strike a chord with me, but I don't know if it's making me more chipper or what.
Got it. All right. Is there anything else in your life that hits you on the same level as working on or riding your motorcycle or playing guitar?
Nothing that I can really think of.
What's the closest second to it?
I mean, probably like learning history or something like that.
Is there a time period of history that really stands out to you?
More recent stuff. I mean, like when I'm talking recent, I'm talking like 1700s to now or something like that.
Yeah.
Not really the old like Victorian stuff. Never really interested me. The old castles and whatnot.
What do you like about history?
I mean, they're great stories. I mean, I like to some of the amazing stuff that went on. And I find the old things, cool. I like to, I have an old motorcycle. I like old things like that.
Vintage.
Vintage, yeah.
Yeah, you're into vintage stuff. Got it.
There's a story behind it all, I guess.
Do Does your brain have a tendency to think in terms of stories?
What do you mean?
You've mentioned story a couple times. And do you have a tendency to apply like narratives to things? Like when you see something, you go, "Oh, that's really interesting," and like try to think about the story behind what you were just looking at that's interesting to you? Or is it actually when people tell you stories?
I mean, if there's nobody to tell me the story, I'll think up, like, oh, that there's an old drive-in over there. I wonder, how long that was open and what kind of stuff went on there.
Do you imagine scenarios that are happening there, or do you just kind of go, "Huh, that's interesting," and think of it more of like the factual piece? Like, it looks like it probably was open around the 1950s, I bet, and that's interesting. I bet it fell on hard times like around the 90s. Is it kind of that sort of thing, or are you like more thinking in terms of like in the 50s it probably was like huge and these are the kind of people that visited it, but by the 90s it was probably these kinds of people that visited it?
I think about it more like that, kind of the people that go there. Not, I think about the factual stuff, but it's not as big on my mind.
What is something, I'm going to go a totally different tack.
Okay.
What is something that is super obvious to you that it surprises you that other people miss?
A lot of common sense kind of stuff. Like one thing I've noticed here is how people drive. Like the stop signs, and when you have the right of way and somebody else has a stop sign and you're letting the stop sign go, I'm like, no, you go. Because it's things like that it's like, that's plainly obvious. Just kind of like the unwritten rules, kind of.
Like when people are being like over considerate, but then when they do that, they actually make things less safe.
Yeah.
Right. How often do you think in terms of safety?
In terms of safety? Like doing things safely? I probably think about it a lot. I mean, riding a motorcycle, I think about it all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if I follow it all the time, but
Right.
think about it all the time.
Right. Do you have any problem if you feel safe? Do you have any problem breaking rules?
If I feel safe? Yeah. I mean, if I know I can do whatever it is and be safe, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to, I don't have a death wish.
Yeah. Do you trust other people's judgment to be able to determine whether or not they can break a rule and stay safe?
For the most part, I think it depends on the person that I know.
What about strangers?
Strangers? No. I see a lot of people do dumb stuff.
So your preference would be that pretty much everybody follows rules because you don't know who you can trust or not.
Yeah.
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 Do you think in terms of hierarchy very often? Like who's in charge, respecting who's in charge? Does it bother you when people don't respect who's in charge?
I mean, it depends for me. It's kind of if that person has earned it. Like if they've just been, put in a position of power and they haven't actually earned it, I can't really, respect them. It's all kind of on an individual basis.
If somebody's in a position of power and you don't feel that they've earned it, what is your usual course of action?
I'm not going to, be a terrible person towards them. I'll just probably, fight a little more to have my say in things and get my opinion in. I don't think I would, be a rebel against their authority. But I would definitely question it a lot.
So you would leave your questioning mostly internal.
Yeah. Mostly internal. Maybe to a few select people that, I trust.
Right. What's something that other people seem to get, but you always seem to miss? Like, what's super obvious to everybody else, and you're always like, how am I always missing this?
Meaning in like art things, like that movie Dances with Wolves. I remember watching that in history class, and our history teacher would pause it all the time, being like, "Okay, this is supposed to represent, this. This is supposed to represent this," and I'm like, I just see a wolf. I don't see how that represents nature. And in art too, people see a painting, and I just see a painting of a castle, and they see all this other stuff.
What's something that would be very surprising to other people if they learned about you?
If I know you, I can't shut up. Like if I know you, when we talk, I can't shut up.
Is that because you're excited to share things with people that you trust? Or is it just a relief to feel like you can talk to somebody?
No, I was probably just, once I like somebody, I like them and I talk to them all the time.
How far into the future do you usually think or plan?
That's hard to say, because I'll plan like road trips, but never, I'm gonna leave this day, like June 21st. It's never like that. I just plan it. This is how long it'll take, and I insert it into wherever I feel like in my future. I don't think that far ahead, because lately I've been in kind of a mindset of now, today, or very soon, but not too far ahead.
Right. Is that something you had to teach yourself?
No, it was kind of forced into me when I took my motorcycle trip out here.
Right.
It was just kind of, once you get on the road, it's like, okay, where's the next gas station? Where can I eat? Where am I sleeping tonight? And that's it. Tomorrow didn't matter, just today.
And how long did it take you to get used to that?
Very quickly.
Are you more comfortable with machines than people?
I'd say so. Machines are somewhat predictable.
When you're around really high-minded, abstract conversation, like the what ifs, right? And things that may or may not have any relationship to reality, just what ifs. What is your threshold for that kind of conversation? Do you cap out at a certain point?
No, I'd say very high. Higher than kind of what I think normal people would be used to.
Can you give me an example of that kind of conversation?
Like, you mean you're talking like, abstract, universe, multi-dimension, like things like that. Yeah, very high. I find all that very fascinating, kind of on that learning thing.
Does it energize you?
Yeah, I'd say so. It kind of energizes me to go learn more and, end up going down a rabbit hole.
So, like conceptual conversation, which you're defining as the universe.
Well, things like that, yeah.
Right.
Not that specifically.
How often are you able to engage in that kind of conversation?
Not a whole lot.
And why is that?
A lot of people I know, like my own mother, she hates things that go basically above her. Like you start talking about politics or anything, she checks out. And so I kind of grew up with that. So it was kind of like I'm kind of guarded about getting into conversation with that because I don't want to push people away.
Sure.
Because it's some people don't like talking about that. They just kind of want to stay in their own little bubble. So not a whole lot, but occasionally.
Would you be able to get yourself lost in a conversation like that? Like surface and realize like 4 hours had gone by?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's happened.
Is that like the holy grail in a date?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's perfect waste of time.
What a great way of saying that. I'm writing that down. When you said before that the thing that would surprise people about you is that once you get to know them and get comfortable with them, that you can't shut up. Do you have a tendency to talk about this kind of stuff?
Yeah, because usually by then I've figured out that we like similar things, we think the same way, kind of things like that. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to have a close friend who can't really go beyond a certain point.
How many of those kinds of relationships have you had in your life?
I mean, a few, not a whole lot. I mean, it's just kind of friends that I've collected over the years, who we've clicked, and
do you ever find yourself if you're not careful, would you become a shut-in?
At times I feel like that, but not all the time. Not, I wouldn't say even half the time. Because there comes a point in me where I'm like, okay, it's time to go outside.
Yeah. What are usually the kinds of situations you find yourself in when you have a tendency to want to shut in? Like, is there any pattern to the stuff that's going on in your life?
I don't think there's a pattern, or if there is, I'm not seeing it.
What's your threshold for being at home and just doing nothing?
Not very long. I mean, maybe a day, and after that, I need to go out, do something. Maybe not even a day. Maybe if I wake up in the morning, by 2 or 3, I'm like, I need to go out and do something.
How easy is it for you to get inside somebody else's perspective?
Very easy. Seeing things from their side, you mean? Yeah, that's very easy.
What does that usually look like? Like, what's your relationship with getting inside somebody else's perspective? Like, when I say that, I have a certain picture in my head. What's the picture going on for you?
Getting inside somebody's head? Just kind of, you mean visualizing it? Oh, well, okay, well, I mean, just kind of seeing things how they see it. I mean, there's always 2 views on something, and I have my view, but I'm always able to see it from the other side, from their side, most of the time. And I find it hard, to make decisions after that. Like if I have an opinion and somebody else has one, I want to see it from their side. I want to see their view, because I could be wrong. I mean, everything's subjective. It's fluid.
Yeah. How obvious is it to you when somebody else is lying?
Um, I'd say if it's something big, if it's like, a relatively big lie, it's usually fairly obvious. If it's just like a small lie, like their name or something, they say their name is Jake and their name's Chad. I'm not going to notice that.
What's more obvious to you? When people's information is good and you can go get information from them because their data is good, or when that person is useful and they're a person that can help you out with something.
So if somebody's more information based, or somebody can help me move or something.
Yeah, or just somebody who's like a good resource.
Or a good resource.
Which one's more obvious?
Which one's more obvious? I'd say a good resource, because it's hard to know where they're getting their information, things like that. You'd have to get them. You have to get to know them a little while longer. At least I would.
Which one's more interesting to you?
Which one's more interesting? I would say the information.
Why is that?
Because to have a conversation with, because they're probably the type of person who, goes and finds a lot of information on something, usually to back up their own opinion, but you can have a conversation with them, and I like to see things from another point of view. So if it's different from mine, then they're going to have a lot of information on that side. So it won't be it won't be uneven for me. I'll have my opinion, their opinion, and I can weigh it.
Are you slow to let people in because you're actually quite sensitive?
It depends on. Actually, I don't think so. I'm the kind of person who, how I always think about it, how there's walls once you get to know somebody, and there's obstacles, and you got to go through all those obstacles slowly, and build trust and everything. And I'm just the type of person to plow through all those walls.
You mean with other people?
Huh?
You mean with other people? You plow through their walls?
Yeah, I mean, it may take a year to build up a close friendship with somebody, and to be best friends, but I'm the type of person to do it in a couple weeks. Just because people take their time and poke and prod and testing them to see, do they like this, don't they like this? And I'm just kind of like, nope, go for it.
Have you ever been profoundly hurt?
By somebody? I mean, yeah, who hasn't?
How long did it take you to recover?
I'd say a while. Maybe a couple months, maybe.
When do you feel at your best?
When do I feel at my best? Just normally, anytime. I mean, the time where I feel like I felt my best was, on my road trip. It was kind of like pure bliss, just kind of going down the road, just focus on today. I didn't have to think about anything in the future, because all that stuff kind of stresses me out. So it was nice to just be like, I don't have to worry about tomorrow. It's just today.
What about the future stresses you out?
the uncertainty of it. Like, no matter what I do, I could do everything right, but something can still go wrong.
Let's see. Were you able to get any really solid thinking done while you were on your road trip?
Yeah.
What kind of things did you think about while you're driving?
A lot of stuff. I mean, I usually have. My mind kind of goes a mile a minute. Like, we could be talking about one thing, and we could be talking about one thing, and before you even are finished responding, my mind's already connected a bunch of dots, and I'm 5 dots ahead. So to kind of avoid that while I'm on the road trip, because time's gonna go by really slowly if I do that, I would put in podcasts and I would just listen to them, what they're talking about, and think about what they're talking about, and that's kind of what I was thinking about on my road trip.
Which podcast did you listen to?
I listened to a lot of them. I mean, like the Joe Rogan podcast, because he has a lot of scientist people on there, and they talk about some crazy things. And they're 3 hours long too, so it's a time waster.
Do you read?
Like books or articles. I mean, I've read a lot of biographies, like a lot of stuff that I find interesting. Music biographies, history stuff. Then I'll read articles about everything that interests me too. But I mean, I'm not going out and reading like fiction. I'm not a big fiction fan.
Have you read much fiction, like in the past, or you just never have been attracted to it?
I have read it. Just stuff that interests me.
What does that tend to be?
I mean, the Harry Potter stuff. I grew up on that.
Sure.
And then a lot of fiction that was set in historical times.
Yeah. What is easier for you, to get inside somebody else's perspective or to get inside their emotional experience?
To get inside their perspective.
Could you ever shut that off?
No, it's difficult for me. And it makes making decisions very difficult because I'm very indecisive, because I can see this side, I see that side, and I can't pick between the two because I see the good and the bad on my side and I see the good and the bad on their side.
Yeah. How old are you?
21.
All right, how's everybody feeling? Feel pretty good about his type? Everybody feel good? Kind of? Where would you go? If you're not feeling good, where would you go from here? Or do you feel solid? You feel solid? Do you feel solid? Yeah, feel pretty solid? No? All right, what does everybody think? INTJ? What do you guys think? INTJ? Did that feel pretty solid for everybody? At what point did you feel solid about that? Thank you, by the way, very much so. Good job.
Thank you.
And by the way, I want to applaud and reward the fact that this is massively out of your comfort zone, right? And yet, did you see how present he was? Super authentic, super present, like super honest. Very good. You're like pretty much the perfect person to do this with. All right, so when did you guys feel really solid about it? When did you feel good? Not till later? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
So you put up a lot of SPs, the authority figure and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot of that.
Yeah.
The motorcycle stuff became
Threw you off, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah, it felt totally like SE. I know.
Down the safety track.
Mm-hmm.
There was some dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
I like the question about the machine.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question.
Okay, low-hanging fruit, what was immediately obvious? Introvert, right? That's the first thing I wrote down. I just went, I, right? Super obvious. Didn't really have to go there, right? So I, for sure. So then it's a matter of like figuring it out. And what was the next super obvious one to you?
SENI polarity.
SENI polarity, exactly. And especially with that beginning. So that was super obvious, SENI, right? But it's like, where did it fall in the stack? As an introvert, he's either NI primary or SE secondary. So now I'm down to what, like how many types is that? Like 4 types? So then it's a matter of figuring it out. So SENI, introvert, and then what were some of the red herrings that you saw? Did you write any notes? What were your red herrings? The motorcycle bit was a red herring?
Yeah, right.
What's that?
Freedom threw me off.
Freedom.
His desire for freedom threw me off.
Mm-hmm.
Not wanting to push people away.
Mm-hmm. Any other red herrings?
So I crossed out NI at one point when you said it's hard to sit and think.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah.
I'm still wrapping my head around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, there is a lot of freedom that he experiences in SE. And I will say that his age is a component. We'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow. But his age is an important piece of information. Now, see, I knew his age. I should have asked it a lot earlier. And I always ask people's age. Always, always, always. Because their generation comes into it. But he's a millennial. So millennials grow up with technology everywhere, right? And it becomes difficult to not, like, check your phone. Is that accurate for you?
Well, that's why I think the whole, like, me not being able to sit and think is that I need to be doing something and have music or something because, you know, I always have, if I'm watching TV, I have my phone. So I'm used to, you know,
Boom.
multiple things.
That's right. Boom, boom, boom. All sorts of things like can just immediately be accessible. So age is a component. Now, I knew his age, so I should have asked that a lot earlier, and I apologize that I didn't. But
It
yes.
also plays into the books versus like articles and things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Different access points of information. You might want to articulate that the mic. But
Well, yeah, what Joel just said is that it also plays into not reading as many books versus articles, right? Millennials have ridiculous amounts of information available on their phone at all times. I mean, we all do. But there's a difference between having it available and like never not having it available or not really remembering a time when that was not available. So millennials have a tendency to be a lot more journal and information. Like you look for a piece of information, you just go find it by Googling it, as opposed to being trained to read a book to get your information. So it's a very different form. Any other red herrings that you guys had?
The history piece.
Yeah. So it was like I was going down the sensor track too. I seriously was. At the beginning, I was like, sensor, 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 right? And I was like, huh. But there's just something off. I don't know. Like there was something that was making me keep going. Were you feeling that too?
Yeah.
Were you like, is it SE? Is it SI? Like.
I was thinking SI,
Mhm.
and then you kept circling back, and that started to clarify.
Well, I kept circling back because I was looking for NI tertiary. So I was trying to figure out if it was NI tertiary. So just how much NI is in there? And then I start asking questions like, because when I asked the question, how long can you hold those conversations? My expectation was 45 minutes to an hour. I was expecting him to be maybe an ISP. And then he was like, oh no, I can just keep going. Yeah, like that's the holy grail of the date. Like indefinitely, 4 hours. What did he say? What a perfect waste of time. Wasn't that beautiful? I'm like, all right, well, I'm going a different track now. So I just immediately went, and then started going completely different track. And then, what do you think my two were? What was I trying to distinguish? Could you tell? INTP and INTJ. Because I'm like, I don't think dudes. Now, the FI stuff was making me think immediately I switched to FI tertiary. Immediately I went from NI tertiary to FI tertiary. And then I started going down all the roads of like, and I was trying not to make it sound like those kind of conversations were super, like I was like, you define it. What do you mean by abstract conversation, right? Like I want to know what you mean. I got a picture in my head, but what's the picture in your head? So I just let him, and he was like describing intuitive conversations. So I'm like, all right, well. And so then it was INTP and INTJ. And did you guys hear the INTP versus INTJ questions? Mm-hmm. Right. What's obvious to you? What's interesting to you? Like, what is the thing that you're vetting people for, basically? Another thing that threw me off, not sensitive. Right? I was like, maybe INTP. Right? No, I'm not really sensitive. I draw people out. It's no big deal. Right? And then I'm like, yeah, but you're young. right? I mean, I was like, have you been profoundly hurt? And you're like, yeah, sure, everybody has. I'm like, oh, no. Have you been profoundly hurt? And I don't mean to like indicate that you haven't been. I'm sure that you have had pain in your life. But there's profoundly hurt, and then there's like walls up profoundly hurt. And you've got time.
I know.
You've got time. All right. The other thing is that it was obvious that NI-SE was on his radar before, but I thought it was SE-NI, right? I'm going SE, secondary, NI, tertiary, but he's also young. I've got to take his age into consideration. So all that SE stuff, why is the future anxiety ridden? Well, because he's young. It's like any possibility that he chooses could be the wrong one. He can simulate so many things that could go wrong, and he can't control them. I'm just going to get on my motorcycle, and I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to listen to podcasts. I'm not going to think about it. I'm 21 years old. I've got time for that, right? Yeah, so even though he's NI, there's a lot of SE in there. Yes?
Well, don't millennials in general have more anxiety about the future?
I would say that's probably generational as well. Yeah, there's a lot of generation in there. All right, what was a moment that solidified something for you? Where you're like, oh, I know what's going on here. The conversation piece. Did everybody just go, intuitive? Yeah, that was like, Any other moments that just solidified it?
When he said he had been hurt and it took him a few months to get over it.
When he had been hurt and it took him a few months, yeah.
He talked about shifting perspective. And he really described, he articulated shifting perspective.
Yeah. And did you notice I like kind of nudged him in that direction, but I let him describe it to me? Conversational profiling is a lot about teeing people up and letting them hit the ball. All right, so you create a container of conversation where you allow them to describe their functions to you, right?
What were you chasing? You asked, how obvious is it to you when someone else is lying?
TI versus NI. For TIs, it is unconscious for TI to know when another person is lying to them, and the other person might not know that they're lying. It's really bad data, but it's hard to say how good are you at observing other people's corrupted data? Like, that's a really hard question to ask. So I usually just say, hey, can you tell when people are lying? And most TIs can go, yeah, I can tell when people are lying. And if he had been like, oh yeah, it's super obvious to me, then I would have gone down a TI route and probably gotten into more technical language around that. I probably would have gone like, and what about cognitive dissonance? How obvious is it to you when somebody else is in cognitive dissonance? And if they're like, yeah, it's pretty obvious to me too. And like when people are lying to you, can you tell when they're lying and they don't even know they're lying? Oh yeah, totally. Can you tell when you can trust somebody's information? I would have that would have been the TI road. And if the person's like, oh, I can totally tell when I can trust somebody's information, I would have just kept going down, and it probably would have leaned towards INTP. But he had like a really kind of open-ended answer on that one. Yeah, I mean, it's really obvious, but yeah. But the perspective piece, he was all over that. So I was going INTJ, INTP, and so NI was a clear winner between the two. Was there a moment when you thought for sure you had it and then realized that you didn't have it? Yeah? Catlin? Yeah, Edison?
Yeah. I started out with ISP. For sure ISP, but then
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the story at the beginning, I just like to take guess right away just for fun. Since I wasn't doing it, I could do that.
Yeah, of course.
But the story about the being hurt, I automatically, and then I just thought ISFP.
Yeah.
And then the things weren't quite adding up either. So.
ISFP. Isn't that interesting that he presented first as his tertiary and inferior process? Right? I know, isn't that fascinating? Yeah, why do you think that was? What are your guys' guesses? Now that you know he's an INTJ. Youth?
That's at the end when he said the age. I said, "Whoa, no way, she's 21." I was really going. I was basing all my answers on a much older age.
Yeah.
That threw me completely.
Yeah, and my apologies because I almost always start out if I don't know the person's age, and I know his age, and so I forgot to ask it. But I almost always start out with, "Do you mind if I ask you how old you are?" Because it's a very relevant piece of information. And you didn't think he was 21, did you? The fact that he's presenting so much more mature and older than he actually is, right? Because you think he's older. Yes. Would that also give you a clue as to what's going on for him, right? Yeah. Because INTJs tend to be old souls. Yeah, old souls. So I was also going down the ISP route, but No assumptions. Like, as soon as I think I know something, I start trying to prove it wrong in the conversation. Like, if I thought he was an SE for sure, I'd start asking intuitive questions like crazy. Like, you know, how much is your threshold? And I immediately try to prove it wrong if I can. And in this case, I'm glad I did that because he started answering NI like crazy. So, life strategies, his life strategies right now, throw off his cognitive function set. Because he's young, he wants to be on the road, he doesn't want to be tied down, the future is scary. Let's get out on the road and let's, you know, let's just get the wind in our hair and the wind at our back and, you know. There are things that I asked that probably didn't make any sense to anybody. Was there anything that anybody wrote down as like, why did she ask that question? Or was everything pretty obvious? Yes, Charis.
The first few questions I thought were rapport builders.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to make him be more comfortable by saying, hey, what's the most ridiculous thing that happened? Hey, what's the craziest date?
All right.
You know, what's your middle name?
Mm-hmm.
I thought those were intentionally just
Yeah, just to get him talking. Yeah, before I ask the flow question, because he's in a very uncomfortable situation. I would be super uncomfortable if I was being profiled in front of a group of people. So I was just like, let's just get you talking and used to talking. Yeah, they were absolutely rapport builders, yeah. Or actually, not even rapport for me and him. It was more rapport just for him to like feel comfortable talking in front of an audience. And at first, it kind of felt like you're like, I'm not sure. But by the time we got to the flow question, the very first question, he had been talking a little bit, and so there was more forthcoming component, although you did amazing anyway, regardless. Any other questions that I asked that people couldn't figure out why I asked them? Or were all the questions, did they make sense for the most part? Okay. I write everything they say down. Everything. Because later on, when I go, so you said this thing, I want to be able to say it in their language. So I write down almost everything they say. And I feel free to take my time. If you noticed, I didn't feel pressured to like immediately ask another one. I took my time to write it down, compose myself, then go back. And if I need to think, I totally give myself permission to think. I just stop. I just go, okay, and then I get into it. Give yourself full and total permission to do that. Don't feel like you have the pressure to ask the next question if you're not ready for it. Give yourself permission to just like, you're in control of the conversation. If you notice, my energy led everything. Because I'm creating a container. As the profiler, you create the container for the conversation. You should be 100% in control. Have you ever profiled somebody who can't stop talking? And they keep wrestling the conversation away from you? You just get the conversational power back. You have to be in control of the conversation at all times, right? As the profiler, that's your job. So if somebody keeps trying to wrestle the conversation from you, first of all, that's a sign as to what their type might be, right? And especially how they're doing it. So use that as low-hanging fruit. And second, just inform them, so we're going to have to do a timeout. We're going to have a moment. I need to be able to guide the conversation, and you're going to have to let me do that. Yeah, in order to get a good, like, accurate profile. Is there anything that you thought was something that you could immediately incorporate into your own profiling? Is there anything you're like, I could totally do that? That you haven't been? Yeah? Edison?
The thing is, I don't do it often enough, but one thing is, I had my mindset that he was definitely ISFP.
Mm-hmm.
And usually I just say, okay, that's it.
Done. Mm-hmm.
But you kept going, and I was like, why is she asking more questions? You already have the answer. And then, it's like more questions, delving deeper.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
does make sense.
Yep. Always go deeper. There were a couple times when he asked me to define my question, and did you see what I did?
You were quiet, you just let him.
Mm-hmm. Just throw it back. How would you define it? Because it's more interesting how he defines it. If I'm like, so what's your relationship with this? And he's like, do you mean this? And I go, I don't mean anything. Because it's not my brain that we're talking about right now. It's your brain. And, yeah.
One question you asked, what's something that other people would be surprised to learn about? Is that just like an open-ended, you're just seeing what comes out of that, or was there a specific thing you were trying to reach with that question?
That's a great question. Yeah, the question that I asked, what is something about you that other people would be surprised by? I almost always ask that question. there are a couple of things I almost always ask, and they are intentionally open-ended. After the flow question is intentionally open-ended. I'm hoping that they'll leave me a cookie crumb trail with the flow question. But if the flow question ends, which it did, like it ended, everybody got a type guess real quick, but I was like, I'm not satisfied. So I go to other open-end questions. That's one. What is something that's super obvious to you and it always surprises you that other people miss? I almost always ask that question. What is something that seems super obvious to everybody else, but you always seem to miss? I almost always ask that question. These are clues as to their weak points and their strengths, and how they see themselves in relationship to other people, their strengths in relationship to others. So I almost always ask those, and those are intentionally open-ended, and I hope they give me something to go with. If you notice, I would ask an open-ended question, and I would let whatever he said kind of guide the trail to the next piece. I just kind of let, I control the conversation, but I let him leave me cookie crumbs, right? And I just kind of go with wherever he's going next.
There was a point where I had started shifting over to NI,
Mm-hmm.
SE,
Mm-hmm.
and then you asked him, what do other people get? And he said that he didn't really catch meaning and art.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, whoa, wait a minute, maybe I shifted away
Mm-hmm.
from SP too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then you circled back, and then I came back
Mm-hmm.
to NI.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that, and basically what you said, is that you were thinking NI, and then he said he doesn't really get meaning in art, and so you went back to SP, but then we circled back around to NI. For you in particular, meaning in art is all about NI. So as an NI, you might overvalue your own experience. That might be something where you're like, oh, well, meaning in art, right? But to some other NI, meaning in art could be FI. Like, I kind of don't get I don't get art. Like people's thing with art, right? So yeah, that's a really good catch. Super good. Sheriffs.
Well, and I was just going to say, as an INFJ, I don't get meaning in art either.
Right.
I have a really hard time with that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I can see how that would be a person's individual experience.
Mm-hmm.
I assume FIs are much better with meaning in art.
Right, yeah, exactly. And this is one of the most challenging things to do. I think especially as an NI, or not maybe especially, but a lot of times as an NI. But I think I do it too. I do it all the time. Overvaluing your own experience so that when you see something familiar in the other person, you assume it's because they're like you. Or when you see something different, assuming it's because they're not like you. And there's a lot of ways to get to the same place. So don't conflate strategy with functions. There are functions and there's a million strategies to show those functions, to relay them, to experience them. So you have to get really clear on what is the foundational component of all of these functions. What actually is NI? Is it meaning in art or is it meaning, right? And it's like when your experience is that it's meaning in art, that's what it is. But it's actually meaning. So being good at like kind of ripping the neurons that fire together, wire together. You've heard that phrase? Getting really good at realizing that your neurons have been firing together and wiring together for you, but that is not the same for everybody. I have missed TIs. I have missed TIs a couple times because their TI did not show up as my TI. We're going to talk a little bit about this tomorrow, and I'll probably share this anecdote again tomorrow, but I recently profiled an ENTP. His FE was off the charts, like just FE all the way. And I'm like, man, you are presenting so FE, but I don't think you're FE. There's something about you that does not feel FE, but you're FE all over the place. Later on in the profiling session, about 3/4 of the way, he revealed that he had been a child actor. So he had been wired from his most impressionable age to be as amiable as possible because that was his survival. Like, that is what you have to be. To survive as a child actor, you have to be, like, pathologically amiable, right? You have to act, you have to look good, and you have to get on cue. And you have to listen for that. And just be like this all the time. So, of course, he came to me for coaching because he's not particularly happy, and he's kind of miserable, and he can't get in his TI, but that's because he was wired to be an FE. And as soon as I realized that piece of information, I was like, okay, now I know what's going on. He's an ENTP. Let people kind of go down that road a little bit if you feel like something's off. If something's off, try to figure out what's going on in their impressionable years. Why would this be a strategy for them? What's going on? Like, what's your relationship with, like, having to feel this way? Open-ended, and let them tell you their story. effectively. All right, was this helpful? Okay, so I've been doing this for a long time, so I probably made it look a little easy. It takes a while to get to this level, all right? And I'm only saying that because Joel made me say that for the camera, that I made this look easy. And I don't know if I made it look easy or not. That's a possibility. But this is very doable for everyone. Very doable. You can totally get here. It's just you kind of gotta let them open up and then recognize where the trails are going. Like low-hanging fruit, keep following the low-hanging fruit. I, super easy. I got to T when machines over humans. Machines over humans, I was like, come on, T. And I thought, maybe FI? No meaning in art. Ooh, T. Right? You just let them tell you what they are and let them express their functions. Yes, Joel.
I don't think you could reiterate enough how much you try to disprove your own conclusions throughout the whole process.
That's true. All right, so one of the major things I do is once I think I know something, I immediately set to disproving it. I don't go with the thing that I think, I go with the thing that can no longer be denied. Does that make sense? Like I think, oh, I'm totally SE, but then I have to like disprove all the other functions, and so I do that. I go through safety. When I thought he was SE, if you notice, I started asking safety questions. What's your relationship with safety, right? And he's like, I'm into safety, right? I'm like, okay, interesting. Then I went to NI. Well, NI was so strong that I didn't even go to NE much until I thought maybe INTP, and then I started going NE a little bit. But yeah, as soon as I thought SE, I immediately started asking questions to see if any of the other perceiving processes would make any sense. And they did. So I was like, okay, well, I have to abandon that. So try to disprove your instincts. Try to disprove what you think is happening. And eventually you'll get to a point where it's like there's just no other possibility. This is the clear, obvious winner. All right, anybody else have any questions? Look pretty good? Okay. All right, so that is conversational profiling. Yes, Chelsea.
You said that at the end you would explain how you describe it to the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want me to go through that? Okay. All right. So, what does it mean to be an INTJ? Do you know what it means to be an INTJ? Have you been around me enough to know what it means to be an INTJ?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So, I'm going to pretend like you don't.
Okay.
All right. So, this is how it works. So, there are 4 different mental processes that everybody's using all the time. Mm-hmm. 4 of them help us make decisions or evaluate the world, and 4 of them help us learn new information or perceive how the world works. And everybody picks one from each set as their favorite. And of these 2 mental processes, one becomes their favorite. So for an INTJ, your favorite mental process is a learning process technically called introverted intuition, but we call it perspectives. It probably doesn't surprise you that perspectives is your favorite way of engaging with the world, right?
No,
you talked about,
sense.
yeah, you talked about perspectiving all the way through, right? Like, once we started talking about perspectiving, you're like, yeah, it's the thing I can't turn off.
Yeah.
Your favorite mental process is also what we call your flow state, because you get energy just by doing this process. Like, just by perspectiving, shifting perspectives, thinking in terms of what could be, thinking about the future. I know right now the future gives you some anxiety, but possibilities, running simulations, and thinking about what could be, all of that will give you energy simply by doing it. And if you don't get enough time to do it, you'll actually get dysthymic, which is a form of depression. It's not sadness, it's just a low energy form of depression. So give yourself as much time as you can to engage in this process of introverted intuition. So it doesn't surprise you that your primary or favorite way of experiencing the world is introverted, right?
No, that doesn't surprise me.
Right. So that means plenty of alone time. And you need to give yourself at least an hour a day, minimum, to go inside, have that introverted time, and to be able to think about whatever you need to think. Now, you do it by keeping your hands busy. And that is a great technique for doing so. So whatever you, like, I mean, you're young right now. It's not like you have a lot of people pulling on you or, like, you know, discretionary time. It's not like you have kids right now or a spouse. But as you age, those things will start to interrupt your flow. You'll have more responsibilities. You'll have more things getting in the way. So it's really important that at an early age, you protect that and communicate that to other people. If you're in a relationship with somebody, I would recommend that you let them know and set the expectation that you need that time to yourself, that alone time. And if they don't give it to you, it's a deal breaker, effectively. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's going to be more difficult to protect that time, but it's very important to you. If you don't do that, you will do, we call it death by 1,000 cuts. Like at first it won't feel that bad, and then over time it'll feel worse, and then eventually you'll just kind of like, want to kill yourself and others, basically. Yeah. So make sure that you get that time and protect it. And what's nice is that you're young enough so that you can carve out a life that gives you that space to protect it. So for an INTJ, that is what we call the driver in their car. If you imagine your mind is like a 4-passenger vehicle, that's who's at the wheel. That's the driver in the car. But just being introverted and just learning or perceiving the world is not enough for anybody. That's a lopsided person. So you balance it out with a mental process that's technically called extroverted thinking, or we call it effectiveness. And that's how you make decisions. That's how you get out into the outer world. That's how you figure out how things should be. You see what works, you implement what works. You create systems, you figure out a linear progression to get to the things that you want. Now, the younger you are, the less developed this will be, because you like to be thinking. You like to be in your head. You like to be doing the perspectiving thing. But as you age, the more you can get into effectiveness, the more you can set projects and tasks and end games and work toward it in a linear fashion, A, B, C, D, the steps to get there, the more healthy you'll become. Because the challenge with people of your type is that you have all these amazing thoughts, and then they just kind of get stuck in your head. Once you can bring them out into the world, you will see that you actually have an impact as a human being. And people of your type are quite rare. So the way that you think is necessary for the world to show up, but if you keep it all inside of you, then nobody gets to benefit from that. So the more you can have an impact on the world, the more satisfied you'll be, and the more everybody gets to benefit from your very unique and amazing brain. All right. Sitting behind, and that process is called the co-pilot process. So think of like the driver perspectives is being supplemented with effectiveness, which is holding a map, basically, and kind of guiding your direction. Now, sitting behind the co-pilot is a 10-year-old, and it's the exact opposite of the co-pilot. So if the co-pilot is extroverted thinking, the 10-year-old is introverted feeling, and this process is called authenticity. This is the part of you that likes to get into music and likes to play music and is about understanding how you feel. Now, it's a 10-year-old because it's a big part of who you are, but it might not be the most sophisticated part of who you are. So have you ever felt like trapped in an emotion that you can't get out of?
Sometimes, yeah.
Like you're just sort of feeling this thing and you're like not sure exactly what you're feeling, but you know you're feeling it, and it's like, yeah. And you're just like trying to figure out how to get out and navigate your way out of it. That's your 10-year-old process. So this is a very important part of who you are. It adds flavor to your personality. You don't want to ignore it. You don't want to mitigate it or marginalize it, but you want to make sure it's not taking over. Because one thing that can happen is that the authenticity piece can sort of whisper in your driver's ear. And since they're both introverted intuition and introverted feeling, they can encourage you to not want to have to take risks and chances by trying to implement projects and get out in the world and make an impact. You can kind of talk yourself into staying home and maybe just kind of thinking great thoughts and considering how things are making you feel. And so that's a loop that you can get into. And the healthiest thing to do is to get out of that loop and get into a project, get into effectiveness, go do something, go make something big happen and get yourself into a project. Now, sitting behind the driver is a 3-year-old child, and that is called extroverted sensing, or we call it sensation. And you're actually are doing a lot with sensation right now. You're living in the moment. Sensation is very much about living in the moment and being present. It's jumping on a motorcycle and just driving to wherever you want to go. And that is a luxury you have right now, which is great because you are using extrovert sensing to also get more introverted intuition time in. Like when you're on your motorcycle, you're able to listen to podcasts, think great thoughts. So it's actually a relationship they have with each other. The challenge is that if you don't get enough of your extroverted sensing time, or if you flee fear of the future, like you're fearing the future so you don't really want to think about that, if you flee it too much and get into sensation, unfortunately you can get quite indulgent. It can be a space that feels good for a time period, but you'll find yourself spinning your wheels. I'm sure there is something inside of you that is telling you that you can't put off the future forever. right? 'Cause
Yeah.
they're like a thing whispering, they're going
Oh
like,
yeah.
it's nice to be 21 and getting on my motorcycle now, but if I do this eternally, there's probably going to be a price to pay.
Yeah.
And that is an accurate voice. So have fun right now, be present, learn that skill. Learn the skill of being able to be present, because it's actually a really great skill for you to like put in your arsenal. But recognize that there will be a time when you have to get into future planning and face the fact that you're going to have to get into action and have an impact that isn't simply improvisational, isn't just going off and like letting yourself be free. That is a time period that you have right now that's awesome, but eventually you will have to get into building something. And I think you probably instinctively know that a little bit.
Oh yeah.
All right. So that is what it means to be an INTJ. Those are your cognitive functions, or the 4 passengers in your car. By the way, did you have any questions for me?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm good.
All right. You're good. You're good.
It's been explained.
He knows this. He's like, I know all this, jibba jabba. Yep. All right. Okay, so that's how I would explain it to somebody whose eyes were glazing over. Got to go fast. Yeah. But if he was like super into it, I'd like go super. I mean, he's obviously familiar enough with all of this stuff to not like, he's like, oh, this is well-traveled territory. But if a person was like super into it, I'd go way into the dichotomies, way into cognitive functions. But that's like the overview. And just kind of keep it like explanation with a little bit of recommendation. Explanation, little bit of recommendation. All right. Any questions on that portion? Does that make sense? Yes.
5 minutes.
Okay. All right. But I think unless anybody has any questions, does everybody feel good about that? Yeah, Chelsea.
What happens when you're profiling someone who's never heard of Myers-Briggs before?
That's actually better.
Really?
That's my favorite. There is a challenge. The more somebody knows about Myers-Briggs, sometimes the worse they are to profile. And it's because they have all of these, they'll basically tell you what they are as you're telling them to forget all of that information. So the more somebody knows about Myers-Briggs, the tougher they are to type.
The explaining portion though, like at the end, when they're like, you say, oh, well, you're an INTJ, and they're like, what is that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so what I would do is I would go into the dichotomies. I'd say, okay, so what that means is introvert. So introvert versus extrovert. And then I would give them just an overview on the dichotomy. Introvert means the inner world's the real world. Extrovert means the outer world's the real world. For introverts, I spend more time on that because it's a pain point for introverts. So I'll spend some time explaining what introvert really means and encourage them to get introverted time. A part of the explanation process is giving them permission to be who they are, celebrating who they are. And for a lot of introverts, being an introvert is a pain point, and not a lot of people have given them permission to be an introvert. So I'll spend time on being an introvert. If they're an intuitive, I'll spend time on being an intuitive. If they're a female thinker or a male feeler, I'll spend time on that. Whatever is like sort of socially usually a pain point for them, I'll spend some time like giving them permission to be that and recommending that they give themselves permission to be that thing. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. That was awesome. All right.